My name is Savannah Linwood, 31 years old, born into a world of whispered legacy and boardroom expectations. I was the only daughter of Elias Linwood, the current CEO of Linwood Mutual, and the granddaughter of Arthur Linwood, the man who turned a family-run insurance operation into a national empire. On paper, I was a Linwood, in presence, posture, and blood. But in the eyes of my family, I was a placeholder, not a successor. I spent most of my childhood in the shadows of mahogany-paneled offices and meticulously tailored suits. My father was too busy climbing, and my mother too invested in appearances. I was left to my own devices, books, numbers, code. I didn't mind. I was good at being unseen. Linwood Mutual wasn't just a company, it was a dynasty. Founded in 1874, it insured the lives of senators, CEOs, and billionaires. It sold safety wrapped in gold foil. Its name meant credibility in the most exclusive rooms in New York, and its annual reports were dissected on Wall Street like scripture. Every Linwood male had sat on the board. Every daughter had married someone who did. No one ever asked what the daughters wanted. Have you ever been told what your future should be without anyone asking what you wanted? Drop a comment. I'd love to hear your story. I joined the company fresh out of MIT, not by invitation, but by insistence. I had a double degree in actuarial science and systems engineering, and I still had to start in data entry. Learn humility, my father had said. I did. Then I built the entire predictive modeling unit from scratch within 18 months. They gave me an office with a window, no title, just a nod. That was 3 years ago, if you've ever been underestimated despite giving everything you had hit like. Let's prove together that quiet effort still matters. I worked in silence, watched everything, and built my own archives. I tracked mortality curves like chess games and discovered patterns in claim approvals that raised quiet alarms. I never said anything. Linwoods don't whistle-blow. They maneuver. On a Thursday morning in October, the call came. Arthur Linwood was dead. A heart attack, they said. Peaceful. Expected. My grandfather had ruled the boardroom with a gaze that cut like glass. Even at 82, he walked like the ground respected him. I hadn't spoken to him in 2 months. Our last conversation was an argument over a strategic misalignment in how we viewed actuarial ethics. He had looked at me with disappointment then, but also with something else. Regret, respect, I couldn't tell. The memorial was held at St. Ignatius, full of old money in black suits and veiled hats. No tears, just transactions of condolences. My father delivered the eulogy with all the warmth of a quarterly report. He built something eternal, Elias said. Now we carry it forward. I stood in the second pew, expressionless. No one mentioned me. Afterward, the family gathered at the Linwood estate in Westchester, a stone mansion overlooking a private lake wrapped in ivy and expectation. I knew the script: whiskey and crystal strategic small talk power rearranging itself. That's when I saw Claire, my cousin daughter of Uncle Harris, and the only other Linwood woman who'd ever dared get a law degree. She was head of internal compliance, sharp-eyed and silk-tongued. We hadn't spoken in nearly a year since the argument at the shareholders' gala, where I'd accused her of massaging audit numbers. "You're quiet," she said, approaching me near the fireplace. "I'm observant," I replied. Her eyes flicked to the folder in my hands. Still reading actuarial risk tables like bedtime stories, I didn't respond. She smiled thinly. "You always did prefer math over manners." "Better odds," I said. The room hushed when Elias tapped his glass. Now that the boardroom is temporarily restructured, he announced we'll be convening a family-only session at headquarters on Monday morning. Certain matters of succession need discussion. He didn't look at me once. Later that night, I returned to my apartment in Midtown, a sparse steel and glass unit overlooking the city I both loved and loathed. I poured whiskey. Then I noticed a plain manila envelope slid under my door. No return address. Inside was a single page, a photocopy of a document. Policy hash LX001EX. Beneficiary Savannah Linwood. Face value $100 0000000. Insured confidential. If this twist just hit you like it hit me, share the video. Someone else needs to see what's coming. I froze. I checked the document details. It looked legitimate. Format watermark signature block, it mirrored internal policy forms I worked with every day. except this one didn't exist in the master database. No one in Linwood Mutual had ever mentioned it. And the face value 100 million was unheard of for private issuance. Not impossible, but unprecedented. There was a second page, a sticky note in block letters, check deceased registry, January 2012. I accessed the secure company database. Only one death matched the month and internal claim code: Andrew Maxwell, aged 48. Died in a boating accident. Payout confidential. Closed case. I cross-checked everything. No beneficiary listed. No payout method. Just a manual override signed off by Arthur Linwood. My stomach dropped. The next morning, I was in the archive room at HQ before sunrise. I scanned physical logs, digital audit trails, payout accounts. The contract didn't exist anywhere but in that envelope, which meant someone had buried it. Or it was never meant to be found. Or it was meant to be found now. At 9:03 a.m., I received a company-wide email from HR notice effective immediately. Savannah Linwood is on administrative leave pending review of a data integrity incident. My access was revoked. Laptop locked. Badge disabled. No warning. Someone knew I'd seen it. Someone was watching. That evening, as I sat in a cafe trying to piece together what was happening, my phone vibrated. A new message from an unknown number. They think you'll go quietly. Prove them wrong. Check the safe in Arthur's study. Password, your birth date. I stared at the screen, pulse thudding. The Linwoods had buried me in silence for years. Maybe it was time to speak in code. Maybe it was time to burn the lie from within. The Linwood estate was cold when I arrived just after midnight. The hallway lights were off, but the security system still blinked green. I didn't need to sneak in. I still had the keypad code despite the board suspending my access from everything else. I moved through the corridors silently, the scent of old wood and power hanging thick in the air. The study was exactly as I remembered: leather-bound books, grandfather's humidor still half full, the painting of the original Linwood patriarch hanging above the fireplace. I walked straight to the far wall behind the oil painting of my grandfather. The safe was there. I took a breath and entered my birth date. Click. The door swung open slowly. Inside was a single flash drive and a handwritten envelope with my name in Arthur Linwood's precise block letters. I unfolded the note with trembling fingers. Savannah, if you're reading this, then they've already moved against you. That means they're scared. That means it's time. Premium X is not a policy. It's a cipher. The shell policy's the deaths they've built an empire on quiet bodies and rigged math. You have the mind to follow it, the heart to expose it, and the name to burn it all down. Finish what I couldn't. I stared at the note for a long time, then pocketed the drive and left without another word. By morning, I had reviewed every file on the flash drive. Most were encrypted, but not all. The first folder contained audio recordings, meetings between board members, whistleblower interviews, internal memos never released. One of the earliest files, dated 7 years ago, was a voice memo from Arthur himself. They think I'm too old to understand what they've done. Maybe I was, but I see it now. They're using high-premium life insurance contracts as funnels, washing money through fake policies and offshore trusts. They're making death a profit margin. Premium X wasn't the beginning. It's the lever. The second folder contained internal claim files with forged signatures, false death certificates, and payment approvals to non-existent beneficiaries. Dozens of them, all pointing to one name as the authorizing officer, Elias Linwood. By 9:00 a.m., my access card no longer worked, but I didn't need it. I met Claire outside the headquarters. She was waiting in a trench coat and sunglasses, looking more like a spy than a lawyer. "They really pulled your ID," she said, tapping her phone. "That's fast, even for my father." "I need 10 minutes on your terminal," I said. "No surveillance, no logs." She hesitated. "You're playing with matches in a room full of gas." "I'm not playing," I said. Claire drove us to a co-working space in Midtown Neutral Ground. She handed me her spare laptop and watched silently as I connected the flash drive. I walked her through the files, Arthur's note, the recordings, the fake claims, the dummy accounts. Her color drained. This is a bomb. It's worse," I said. "It's evidence." Claire sat back, running her fingers through her hair. I thought the numbers didn't add up. I assumed it was aggressive investing or payouts hidden in reinsurance. She looked at me. But this is a criminal enterprise, built on the Linwood name, I said, on ours. We sat in silence. Then she whispered, "Do you know what would happen if this got out?" I nodded. Linwood Mutual collapses, the family trust implodes, and everyone sitting on that board goes to federal prison. She stared at the screen, including my dad. "Yes," I said. Claire leaned back in her chair. "I always thought Arthur hated you because you were too stubborn to play along." "He didn't hate me," I said. "He was testing me." She met my eyes. "And what's your move now?" "We leak this to the press. Full exposure." She shook her head. "They'll bury you before that happens. Not if we go through the board. They'll never allow it. They won't have a choice." I pulled out a second envelope. Arthur had included a notarized letter naming me as an independent beneficiary of the Linwood Foundation. It granted me temporary proxy access to 28% of voting shares, enough to call an emergency board meeting. Enough to be heard. Claire stared at it. "That's real. I already verified the signature with the registrar. It's been sitting in a lockbox at Wells Fargo for 3 years. That's how he protected you," she murmured, "by making you too dangerous to silence." I nodded. "We're going to call the meeting. We're going to put everything on the record. And then we let the board choose, come clean or go down together." Claire hesitated. "You're risking everything." I smiled faintly. "So are they." At 11:00 a.m., I walked into Linwood Tower through the front entrance. My badge didn't work, but Claire escorted me through security. I ignored the stares. I ignored the whispers. In the boardroom, a dozen chairs sat around a gleaming oval table. Elias was at the head, flanked by his brother Harris, CFO Margot Wynne, and 2 legal advisors from Blackmere and Company. He looked up when I entered. "You're not authorized to be here," he said coldly. I dropped the notarized letter on the table. "I am now," I said. He didn't move. "What is this call for emergency review under Article 12 of the Linwood Charter? 28% shares, triggered by whistleblower evidence and beneficiary disclosure." Claire added, "The documentation is verified. Legal grounds are solid." Harris looked like he'd swallowed glass. "This is a stunt." I leaned forward. "No, this is a reckoning. They didn't adjourn the meeting. They didn't call security. They didn't deny me, which meant they were afraid, which meant I was right." For the next hour, I presented the data payout reports, falsified death claims, offshore transfers, audio recordings. I saved the final audio for last, Arthur's voice strong and clear. "If Savannah is reading this, it means I've failed to stop what's happening inside Linwood Mutual. But she won't, because she has what none of you do, a conscience." When the audio ended, the room was silent. Elias stood adjusting his tie. "This is a manipulated narrative. My father was ill. Confused. This means nothing." Claire handed him a copy of the bank transfer history from Premium X's payout chain. "Then explain the $7.2 million wired to a shell company registered to your Cayman Islands trust." Elias froze. I turned to the rest of the board. "You have a choice. Cooperate and dismantle the network, or go down with it." No one spoke. The silence meant the tides had turned. And it wasn't over. Not yet. They didn't vote. Not yet. But they didn't throw me out of the room either, and that was something. I had forced open a door they had kept locked for decades, and now they didn't know whether to slam it shut or peek inside. Claire and I walked out of the boardroom in silence. Only when the elevator doors closed did she exhale. "You just accused your father of fraud in front of half the East Coast's insurance elite." I gave a small shrug. "Technically, I let Arthur do that part." She glanced at me sideways. "Do you realize what happens if this escalates?" "Yes," I said. "That's why I'm not done. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I stayed in a hotel in Midtown under Claire's name. I knew they were watching me now, maybe even tracking me. The Linwood family had connections in law media politics. They had silenced journalists before. They had made things disappear. People, too. But I wasn't going to disappear. I was going to surface loudly. The next morning, I met with Tommy Evans, a young financial analyst who used to work in internal risk compliance. He had sent me an encrypted message the night I found the flash drive. He hadn't included his name, but I'd recognized his signature, a misaligned file naming format only he used. "I was fired 6 months ago," he said, sipping lukewarm coffee across from me in a corner booth. Official reason was unauthorized access to sensitive files. Unofficially, I was getting too close. To what I asked, though I already knew. To the real reinsurance chain, the one that runs beneath the books. They're using offshore policies to inflate asset portfolios. Premium X wasn't an outlier, it was a key. Every one of those death payouts, they recycled them, insured the same shell entities under aliases. The same dollar moved 3 times before landing in someone's trust account. He slid a flash drive across the table. I backed up everything before they froze my access. I was going to go to the press, but then your grandfather died. Then you got suspended. I figured they'd buried you too. Almost, I said. But not quite. Tommy leaned forward. Why'd he trust you with this? I thought about Arthur the way he used to observe quietly from the far end of the dining table while others talked over each other. The way he once told me when I was 17 and angry at how easily they ignored me. They underestimate silence. Use it. Because I never asked for the throne, I said, which meant I couldn't be bought. I returned to Claire's office by noon. She had already requested a legal audit of every Group X file processed in the last 10 years. Her team was working in total secrecy. "They're going to try to bury this," she said as she poured 2 glasses of seltzer and handed me one. "Margot's called for a closed executive session tomorrow. Probably to challenge your voting proxy." "They'll say Arthur wasn't of sound mind," I said. She nodded. "They might even have falsified medical reports to prove it." "I hope they do," I replied, "because then I can prove they've been forging records long before now." She stared at me. "You're really going all the way with this?" "There's no halfway anymore," I said. "Not after the Premium X fund." Claire narrowed her eyes. "Wait. What fund?" I pulled a thin black folder from my bag. "This," I said, placing it on her desk, "is the last document Arthur left for me. I found it hidden in a second compartment inside the safe. It was a founding charter for something called the Linwood Ethical Trust, signed and notarized, dated 3 years earlier. It authorized the redirection of all proceeds from Premium X, $100 million, into a new nonprofit foundation designed to restore ethical transparency in financial underwriting, with Savannah Linwood as the sole lifetime steward. Claire read it twice. "This gives you full control over the trust." Yes, and Premium X was just the first funding vehicle exactly. Arthur knew the company wouldn't fix itself. He wanted an external force with leverage. She looked up. "You're not just trying to expose corruption. You're planning a hostile moral takeover. I'm offering the board a choice," I said. "Reform voluntarily or face total collapse when I go public. And if they choose collapse, then I rebuild it," I said quietly from the ashes in his name. The next day, the closed-door session was a farce. Margot Wynne led the charge, citing concerns about unauthorized access, improper chain of custody of documents, and questions about Arthur Linwood's cognitive capacity in his final years. They presented a psychiatric report claiming he had early-stage dementia. I waited until they finished. Then I walked to the front of the room and laid down a USB drive. "This is a dated, time-stamped video from 3 months ago," I said. "Recorded by Arthur Linwood himself, in the presence of a notary, a digital forensic expert, and his estate attorney. In it, he outlines the purpose of Premium X, discloses the existence of the Linwood Ethical Trust, and confirms my designation as steward." Claire plugged it into the projector. Arthur appeared on the screen, seated in his office, voice clear and firm. "They will question my mind when I'm gone, so let this record show I am more lucid now than I've ever been. What I built has become corrupted. It must be reclaimed not by legacy but by principle. I choose Savannah because she is the only one who never asked for my throne but proved worthy of it." Silence fell. Elias looked pale. His lips parted, but no words came out. Harris stood abruptly. "This is inadmissible." Claire stepped forward. "The video is legally certified. The notary is present in this building, available for testimony. The estate attorney has issued a sworn affidavit affirming its validity." Margot muttered, "This isn't how we do things." "Exactly," I said. "And look where that's gotten us." I turned to the board. "You can deny this all you want, But the forensic audit begins next week. The trust has been activated. The press already has copies of the shell accounts, and if I disappear, that file goes directly to the FBI. No one said a word. I looked directly at Elias. You once told me I wasn't ruthless enough to lead this company, I said. You were right. I'm not ruthless. I'm principled. And that's what makes me dangerous to people like you. That night I stood alone on the rooftop of my hotel, watching the city breathe below. My phone buzzed with messages calls from journalists, ethics committees, even a senator's office. But the one I opened first was from Claire. Board just voted to suspend Elias pending investigation. They want to meet with you formally. You won. I stared at the message. I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt like I'd only just begun, because the truth wasn't just a weapon. It was a responsibility, and I wasn't finished using it. The official board session was scheduled for Thursday morning at 10:00 a.m. sharp. The Linwood Tower's 37th floor executive chamber, normally used for quarterly updates, shareholder briefings, and celebratory champagne, was now the site of what would either be a controlled burn or an absolute implosion. The night before, I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid. I'd crossed that threshold the moment I pressed play on Arthur's final video. I didn't sleep because I was rehearsing every possible counterstrike, every clause in the Linwood Charter, every footnote in the ethics memorandum Arthur buried under a decoy file called legacyadjust_2016.xlsx. Claire and I met at 6:00 a.m. in her office coffee silence, and 3 red binders laid out like weapons. Inside forensic audits, internal emails, external payouts, annotated shell company records. Every piece of the puzzle. This will either end in applause or fire, she said as she zipped up her leather portfolio. I'm fine with both, I replied. By 9:30 a.m. the boardroom began to fill. Elias was already seated, his expression unreadable. He wore a charcoal suit and navy tie, his signature look. His body language was relaxed, but that slight twitch in his temple gave him away. He wasn't in control, and he knew it. Harris, the perennial opportunist, avoided my gaze. Margot Wynne, the CFO, sat stiffly, her pearl necklace drawn too tight against her throat. 2 legal advisors from our longtime law firm Blackmere & Company positioned themselves near the back, likely ready to issue statements or suppress them, depending on the temperature. And then there was Meredith Brandt, the wild card. At 68, Meredith had outmaneuvered more men than I could count. She once rescued a dying insurance firm by firing its entire C-suite and hiring female analysts straight out of graduate school. She was on the Linwood board not because she was connected, but because Arthur feared her less than he respected her. Today she sat at the head of the table, hands folded, eyes sharp. Let's begin, she said with the flat cadence of a judge. Claire Linwood, legal counsel. Savannah Linwood, recognized steward of the Linwood Ethical Trust. You've called this meeting under Article 12. The floor is yours. Claire stood first, calm, measured. For the record, this hearing concerns material evidence of systemic fraud conducted within Linwood Mutual over a 10-year period, concealed through false policy issuance, off-ledger beneficiary chains, and structured shell transfers. She distributed the red binders. Attached are full exhibits. Forensic audits confirm that at least 46 policies were constructed to appear legitimate, but linked to deceased or unverifiable identities. The payout total across these policies exceeds $232 million. I stood next. A hush followed. I walked to the projector, plugged in the drive, and projected a flowchart of entity transfers. I'm not here to make a speech, I began. I'm here to show you what the company has become and what it was never meant to be. I clicked once. Policy Series Group X. Outlier patterns beginning in 2013. Initial approval signatures, Elias Linwood, acting CEO. I clicked again. Beneficiaries, shell companies in Bermuda, Panama, Luxembourg, and the Isle of Man. Final endpoints, Linwood-linked trusts, offshore hedge accounts, and 2 real estate holding firms in Delaware that don't own any property. A low murmur started. Harris muttered, "This is absurd." Claire replied sharply, "We have wire confirmations and IP access logs." Margot broke in. "Savannah, I don't know what you think you're doing. I'm not thinking," I cut in. "I'm presenting." I hit play. Arthur's voice filled the room, clear and deliberate. The final recording. If this is being played, then the safeguards have failed. I established the Linwood Ethical Trust with the express purpose of creating a pressure valve. Savannah Linwood has full authority under its charter. The evidence you've seen wasn't collected in panic. It was compiled deliberately. I watched this board forget its purpose. You built a profit machine on obituaries. Silence. Then Claire dropped the final document on the table, a notarized letter transferring 28.3% of Linwood Mutual's voting shares into the trust's control effective the day after Arthur's death. A calculated act. A dead man's coup. Meredith looked down, reviewing the clause. This gives the trust voting super priority. Savannah has standing to introduce executive motions. Elias finally spoke. My father was confused in his final year. He was generous but paranoid. He believed he was being undermined. I turned to him. He wasn't paranoid. He was right. He smirked low and venomous. You think you can survive the fallout of this? You think you'll come out clean? You're still a Linwood. By name, I said. Not by design. If you've ever stood your ground against someone who thought they owned your story, hit that subscribe button. You belong to no one but yourself. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. You have no idea what you're unleashing. Meredith held up a hand. Enough. There's only one question. Do the facts warrant immediate restructuring, or should this be buried like the rest? She turned to the room. I call for a motion to suspend Elias Linwood indefinitely pending external review. Silence. Then Harris raised his hand. Aye. Margot slower aye. 2 other board members, both independent, followed. Claire voted last aye. Meredith nodded. Motion passes 5-1. Mr. Linwood, your access is revoked as of now. Elias didn't move. Then after a pause, he rose. He looked at me. I saw something flash in his eyes, rage, yes, but also disbelief. That after everything, after decades of control and dismissal, I'd walked in and undone him. I built this, he said quietly. I kept it alive. No, I said. You kept it profitable, not the same thing. He walked out of the room. No escort, no handcuffs, just a hollow shell of power walking into sunlight. Meredith turned to me. Do you want the CEO seat? No, I said instantly. I want clean audits, real compliance, and transparency. Starting now. She smiled, thin and approving. That Miss Linwood is the first sensible thing anyone's said in this room in a decade. After the meeting, Claire and I returned to Arthur's office. It hadn't been touched since his death. His watch still sat on the desk. His fountain pen? His framed photograph of Linwood Mutual's original building from 1874? Claire pulled 2 glasses from the drawer, poured bourbon. Well, she asked. I don't feel anything yet, I admitted. No victory, I shook my head. Just responsibility. She clinked her glass to mine. That's how you know it's real. A few hours later, the press release went live. Linwood Mutual announces structural reform following internal ethics review. The statement was sterile, diplomatic cold. Names weren't listed. Details were absent. But the message was clear to those who knew where to look. Something had broken inside the Linwood dynasty. And something better was rising in its place. 3 weeks after the board meeting, Linwood Tower was quieter than I'd ever known it. The usual tension of high finance had been replaced by something stranger uncertainty mixed with hope. The marble floors still gleamed, the receptionist still smiled, and the security guards still wore earpieces. But the silence behind closed doors had changed. People were talking. And not just about quarterly performance. They were whispering about me. I wasn't the CEO. I hadn't asked for the title, and I'd refused it when offered. But as the appointed steward of the Linwood Ethical Trust, I held 33% of the company's voting shares. I didn't need a corner office. I had power. And with that power came something heavier than I'd anticipated responsibility for what came next. I started with the small things. The Human Risk Division, long ignored, was placed under independent audit. I brought back former whistleblowers, offered reinstatements with back pay. Claire was named interim chief legal officer, and together we revised the compliance protocols that had failed so completely under Elias. We froze all Group X-style policy operations. Every offshore entity that had received funds in the last decade was placed under third-party scrutiny. We reached out to the families of questionable claims. Some responded with gratitude, others with legal threats. But it didn't matter. The machine was stopping. One morning, I found a handwritten letter in my inbox, no return address. The handwriting was unmistakable Arthur's. If you're reading this S, you've already passed the point of no return. That's good. The view is clearer from there. Remember, leadership isn't about control. It's about consequence. Burn the wrong things. Keep the bones. I folded the letter and slipped it into my journal. On the 25th day after the hearing, the Department of Financial Conduct launched its investigation. Elias had already left the country personal retreat, his attorney called it. But subpoenas were in motion, and the federal prosecutors were circling. I didn't feel triumph, just gravity. Because what no one told you about winning was that it often felt like digging graves for everything you used to love. One night, I found myself back at the Linwood estate. I hadn't been there since the day I opened the safe. The lights were off, but the air still held a quiet electricity residual power that lingered long after the people who once held it were gone. Claire met me at the edge of the garden. "You sure you want to be here?" she asked. "No," I said honestly, "but I think I need to be." We walked the same path Arthur used to pace after dinner. She told me that Harris had submitted his resignation earlier that morning. Margot was still negotiating an exit package. No one had seen Elias's son Daniel in weeks. The dynasty had fractured, and no one knew whether it could or should be repaired. I looked up at the windows, all dark. "It's strange," I said. "I used to think this place would one day be mine, that if I worked hard enough, they'd let me in." "They never would have," Claire said softly. "I know," I replied. "That's why I took the parts that mattered and left the rest." That weekend, we hosted the first Linwood Mutual Community Stakeholder Forum, something Arthur had once proposed, but had been laughed out of the boardroom for suggesting. I stood on a simple stage in a midtown conference hall facing rows of nonprofit leaders, social entrepreneurs, even victims of insurance discrimination. "I'm not here as your savior," I said. "I'm here because I failed to act sooner. Because I let fear keep me quiet while harm was done in the name of profit. But this," I gestured to the room, "this is not a company anymore. It's a responsibility." We announced the reallocation of $60 million from the Linwood Ethical Trust toward initiatives supporting insurance access for underinsured families, veterans, and immigrant communities. We began an inquiry into how policies had historically excluded people based on algorithmic bias. I hired data scientists to rework the models I had once designed to serve shareholders. One afternoon, a woman in her 60s approached me after a meeting. "My husband died in 2015, she said. "We were denied payout for a clause I never understood. I lost our home. I always thought it was my fault." "It wasn't," I said gently. Her eyes filled. "I'm glad someone finally said it." 2 days later, I received a letter from the office of the governor requesting a private meeting. I went reluctantly. They offered to place me on the State Ethics Advisory Council. I declined. "I'm not interested in panels," I said. "I'm interested in rebuilding trust where it was lost." The man nodded, oddly respectful. "Then keep doing what you're doing. Just know people are watching." They were. The press circled like hawks, but the story they expected, corporate bloodbath, family revenge, dramatic succession, never quite materialized. I refused every interview. I let the numbers speak instead. And quietly, something started to shift. Stockholders didn't flee. Instead, new investors emerged: impact funds, ethical wealth groups, long-view players who valued restoration over quarterly drama. The stock dipped, yes, but it stabilized. One night, I sat alone in Arthur's old study, now restructured as the Trust's transitional office. The bookshelf still held his medical dictionaries. The small silver clock still ticked. I found myself reading one of his notes again. "Reputation is temporary. Character is recursive. Don't defend the name, refine it." That's when I made my final decision. I filed the paperwork to legally rename the Linwood Ethical Trust. It would now be called the Phoenix Reserve, a name without bloodlines, without heirs, just purpose. 6 months later, the sun shone brighter on the 37th floor of Linwood Tower. The frosted glass now bore a new logo, simpler, bolder. Below it, a plaque: "Integrity is not inherited. It's built every day." I stood before the windows with Claire overlooking the skyline. "You ever wonder what he'd say?" she asked. "Arthur." I smiled faintly. "I think he already said it." in every choice he let me make without him. And Elias, she asked. I shrugged. He'll probably be tried. Maybe serve time, or maybe not. But he lost the one thing he worshipped. Control. I nodded. Control. Claire sipped her coffee. You know you could still take the CEO seat. No, I said. I don't want to be a symbol. I want to be the standard. She laughed. God, you sound just like him now. I looked out over the city, no longer the outsider, no longer the hidden heir. Just a woman who reclaimed her narrative and built something better from its wreckage. The story didn't end with a gavel or applause. It ended with policy drafts rewritten, with victims acknowledged, with silence broken, and a name once drenched in shadow now etched in light. Not for what it had been, but for what it dared to become. If this story moved you, there's more in the description. Watch the next chapter. Or better yet, share this one with someone who needs to reclaim their voice.